Stay behind, everybody. You're doing a good game afterwards. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Charter Review Board meeting on Monday, July 12th, 2001, 2 o'clock. Just a reminder for everyone to please silence your cell phones. Do appreciate it. If the town clerk would please call the roll.
Okay, Member Greenwald,
Present.
Member Riami, Member Ty,
Present.
Vice Chairperson Rosen. She will be here shortly. She's just running a little late. Chairperson Donaldson,
Here.
Town Manager Labadie is present. Town Attorney Tercibia. Thank you.
Thank you. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Motion to approve.
And a second? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the agenda is approved. We will open up for public comments. They will be limited to 5 minutes per speaker. I do not know if we have any members of the public that want to comment at this time. It appears not. Linelda, Town Clerk, are there any public comments that you've received?
We have no pre-registered public comments today.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. In that event, public comments are closed. And we'll move on to approval of the meeting minutes. We'll take up first the approval of the meeting minutes from June 9th, 2021. Are there any further corrections to the minutes of June 9th, 2021? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 9th, 2021?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? Now, a second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Okay. So the meeting minutes of June 9th are approved. At this time, we'll take up the approval of the meeting minutes of June 21, 2021 Charter Review Board. Any corrections to the minutes of June 21, 2021? If none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
And is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Before we get into unfinished business, I do want to thank Vice Chair Rosen for filling in at the meeting last week. I unfortunately had to be away, but did have an opportunity to view the video and kind of get back up to speed. So with that, we can move on to unfinished business and continue our discussion regarding the recommendations. And I believe Member Ty also has some outstanding comments that he's going to want to bring to our attention as well. How would the group like to proceed? Do you want to run through Mr. Ty's comments first and then move into the others, since they're kind of outstanding in the order?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, just a comment. As we go through things today, I wonder if it would be possible for us, if we're in agreement on something, to begin to get rid of some of these items so that we can move ahead and actually have a formal motion to approve whatever we've decided, assuming we can come to some agreement.
Mhm.
And then eventually, if hopefully we'll come to consensus on most items. But if not, then perhaps we can, submit a majority and a minority recommendation even on some items. But I'd like to see us, because our discussions have been very fruitful, I think, but after a while, we're going to be repeating ourselves. And at some point, decisions have to get made. So that would be my only suggestion for today.
Okay, appreciate the input. I agree. I think in the sort of deadline we have approaching, even with the flexibility of one additional meeting, we need to kind of put closure on some of these things, if at all possible today, certainly by the next meeting, if we also decide to extend to do final adoption. So yes, we'll certainly move ahead in that spirit and see if we can come to resolution on a few of these things. Okay, with that, Mr. Ty, if you'd like to move through your items, I'd be glad to take them up and discuss them.
Yeah, thank you very much. When I look at the website and try to look for charter, town charter, I got a little bit confused. And when I look at the so-called town code of ordinance, then I found charter in that title. Actually, charter should be a very important document. And I would suggest that we should modify a little bit that title, Town Code of Ordinance, to Town Charter and Code, or something like that. And when I look at the table of content, on the website, as you see in the table, first table, part 1, charter, and I could not find part 2 or part 3. So I would suggest that we revise that one and have the title Town Charter, Ordinance, and Code. And under that title, we have a part 1, Charter, part 2, Ordinance and Code. That means that we add part 2 to make it very clear. We have part 1, Charter, part 2, Ordinance and Code.
Within the context of how the charter is organized, does the city have latitude to edit the nature of the arrangement of the charter provisions without formal referendum change to those items?
Sorry, it goes through Muni Code. So I'm not sure from their formatting standpoint if they have a standard that all codes are Part 1 charters, but we can certainly talk with them about that. But that's changing the numbering of a Part 1 to Part 2 would not have to go to referendum.
Okay, so it would be appropriate for this group to take up a recommendation to the town commission that they approach Muni Code about a reorganization of the presentation online, then, well, actually in the charter and the ordinance provisions.
Yes, essentially editorial move, yes.
I get the sense that might be well beyond the time limits and what we could undertake here, but we could recommend that. And perhaps the town clerk, town manager could then work with the commission to take Mr. Ty's thoughts into consideration in doing that. Okay. With that being said, on this particular topic, might I just simply get a recommendation approved by this group to the town commission regarding an examination of the organization of the charter? We have a
Motion. I make that motion.
motion and a second on that? Second. Okay, town clerk, would you please call the roll on the motion?
Member Riami,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Rosen, Member Ty,
Yes.
Member Greenwald,
Yes.
and Chairperson Donaldson.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you.
The,
And your second?
the second one, Article 3, municipal organization and officers. Normally, when we talk about an organization, the organization should reflect the entire organization. That means, in this case, I think we missed town commission. Town commission is a part of the organizational structure. And the town commission role and duty were explained, scarcely, throughout the document. I don't know how can we put, together the on one section for town commission, and under town commission we have a town manager. So if you look at the left side of the table, the current provisions has a town manager without town commission. And then section 302, finance director. I think we should switch section 3.03 departments of the town before the finance director. And after that, I wonder why finance director is listed in here in the charter, in the organization, but not the chief of police and not all the head of the government, including clerk.
Vice Chair Rosen.
Hello, all. If we're going to make those changes, since those people, at least prospectively, if we agree, are going to report to the town manager, it would seem to make sense for those provisions, if we're going to reorganize, that they be in Article 4, Chapter 4, under personnel, because they report to well, in theory, if we agree, they're going to report to the town manager. So with respect, I see the point of the organizational issue, but if we're going to do it, becomes part of a personnel issue and would belong in the personnel section.
I would be a little bit loath to change too much stuff again, unless we're going to make some real substantive difference. I don't want to get everybody necessarily confused about things that aren't necessarily very important. If any of this ends up, as this goes forward, both to the commission and particularly for referendum. So if we feel that some of these movings around are important, then that's fine. But I think we should try and make our changes as simple as we can, and the document is easy to understand and as least changed as possible when we go to the public, unless there's a real reason to change. That's sort of how I've looked at this from the beginning, and how I know in the very beginning, we talked about, well, should we just go to a different format? Our charter is extraordinarily detailed. Maybe we should just simplify things. And we kind of decided, no, that might be, just not what people are used to. And this seems to be working okay. That's my only comment. Otherwise, I see what we're talking about.
Mr. Remy?
I think that items like this should be taken up by the town manager and the clerk and whoever else appropriate in the town to make any changes that are, whether this should be in that section or that.
I agree. Again, I think these are good comments. They're good questions. And I think we should probably allow the town manager and the commission and the attorney address those organizational elements and make those changes as they're able to within the context of ordinances or typical reorganization of wording without affecting the charter, and kind of lump that in with our previous recommendation that they may want to take a look at that. And then in a more far-reaching way, maybe down the road, look at a more simplification. But I think for the time being, we've got quite a few on our plate that we need to take up.
Yeah, I agree. We should not make major, revision. But if you look at article number 4, I suggested that we can easily move section 4.03, 4.04 to article 3 under the police, chief of police. We just move it because in this section, this article, suspension and discharge of personnel. And then why should we put your police powers, duties there? It's not a good fit regarding the content of this section. This section focuses on suspension and discharge. Why the Charter of Act, this section, police power and police chief employment and duties. Actually, the title doesn't reflect exactly the content of the police here. So I would like to suggest that we move easily these two sections lump into one under section 3.04, something like that, for police chief.
Okay, for clarification again, if the town manager could advise the group, are these again changes that can be made within the context of the town commission taking up these items rather than a charter amendment?
The first suggestion was just editorially saying part 1 is the charter, stand by itself. Part 1 is the ordinance, stand by itself. That to me is a pretty simple editorial. If you're talking about moving sections of the charter around, I'll have to look into whether that would require going to the voters or not. It might. I know in other instances, if you, is that substance? Probably not if you're just taking word for word, but I'm not sure if you're moving it from place to place, that may need to be a referendum. So I have to look at that if that's the committee's decision.
All right, thank you. Then I would suggest perhaps the context of this would be whether this group feels it is urgent or at a level where we feel that's something we want to undertake. Vice Chairman?
I would just like to say that based on our town attorney's research, I'm fairly certain that if we're going to reorganize the charter sections, it has to be part of this commission's review. That being said, the question of whether we want to is a separate issue. My suggestion is that we look at the substance of what we are agreeing on in terms of organization, since most of these suggestions concern sections 3 and 4, which are about personnel organization. Make a determination and then see whether it flows and necessarily requires any change or whether we can live with it as it's organized.
I don't know if we've had a sufficient time to really delve into that within the current context. So we really only have 2 ways to proceed. One is to make a decision that we're not going to look at it, or once again, defer it to a future meeting when we can delve into that and ask for additional input from town manager and the attorney.
I think we need to get to the substantive items that as Dr. Greenwald said, we need to focus on the business of what's actually in the charter and a review of the sections. I have no problem with the town attorney, manager, clerk, whoever, and the commission deciding, the format of it. I think we need to move on.
Yeah, along those same lines, I think if we can make our major decisions today. As the attorney forms out the draft that we're going to be approving at a future meeting, and we have the additional information about how difficult it is to just move sections around, we can decide at that time as we see how the document flows, whether we want to move from one section to another. But as was pointed out, some of that's going to depend on the decisions that we make about who's reporting to whom and who's suspending whom and all the other issues that we've talked about so far in terms of where things may best fit. So I would also suggest that we do it in that order.
Okay.
Yeah, the last one.
Yes.
Yeah, the last one, this is minor thing, If you look at the two section there, Article 2, 21, and then Article 3, Section 301, you see the last sentence of each section are the same. I would suggest that we delete the second sentence of Article 2, Section 21, because that sentence was under Section 3.01, town manager.
And to be clear, I see a note, it says should be deleted. Which specifically are you looking at deleting? The one itemized under 21 or the one under section
I
301?
think he's looking at it as redundant, right?
Yeah, redundant.
But
The same,
So it's like one way or the other just because it's redundant.
just a delete one.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, but
It
Once
strikes me a little bit as kind of a housekeeping item.
I think once again, we need to look at it in terms of the whole context. All
Okay.
these.
Well, let's put this in the context then of the other items that we're going to take up today and see where that might go, if that's okay. All right.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. All right. What I would like to do, if there's nothing else on that particular topic, that we move into the direction that was established at the last meeting with some additional input from the town attorney on some specific language and options under the items that we're continuing to consider, and perhaps eliminate a couple of these if we no longer wish to pursue them. So with that, what I would like to do is make reference to the letter we received dated July 8th, 2021 from the town attorney that outlines each of the sections. I would suggest we just move through each one and see where it takes us. So the first one up is section 106.3, dealing with terms of office. And we have a potential version of the language which would modify the current 2-year terms to 3 successive elected terms for each office. Also with a stipulation that no person shall serve more than 12 consecutive years as a town elected official. After not serving as an elected official for 1 year, said person shall be eligible to serve as an elected official. So that is the language under consideration for discussion. And I'll open it up to Mr. Remy first, if you would like to make some observations on that.
Okay. I'm strongly in favor of moving to this change in the provision to go from 2 to 3 years with the maximum 12 consecutive years. I see no reason other than, what's brought up frequently is, well, if we wanted to get rid of this person, they've served long enough, they could move into other positions if you were vice mayor, you could become mayor, you could be a regular commissioner, and you could keep moving around. I think if we have people who, number one, want to serve, number two, the town wants them to serve, that we should have them, serve realistically. 3 3-year terms is not too long, in my opinion. And if we have the additional provision of 12 consecutive years, that's probably enough. And they can then take a year off and become reelected. And I'm not concerned that, as some people say, well, geez, if they're in office and we don't like them and we can't get rid of them, there's apathy by the voters. I don't see that much apathy in this town. If somebody's not doing what the town wants them to do, I've seen, in effect, them removed by election. So I'm not concerned about it at all. And I think we have, as an example of this particular commission, and I realize that that's not going to happen all the time, but the fact is if you have good people and you want them to serve, they should be allowed to serve.
Mr. Tai?
Yeah. Yeah, I think our proposed change, is good because if we have some really good commissioners who would like to serve, then a 3-year term will help, us to have that good commissioner to stay on. But at the same time, some of us were concerned with the time, for the commissioner to serve. Then the 12-year limit is really good, to satisfy the needs of a good, competent commissioner. But at the same time, to meet our concern with the long time serving of someone.
Dr. Bramwell?
I'm happy with this, with all the red changes. It needs to be clear, and I think it is, but just to check that it's elected term. So if someone is appointed, they could actually serve 11 years, presumably consecutively, or a little bit less than 12 theoretically. But as written, I think that it's fine. As you know, my main thing was I didn't want to change to 4-year terms. As long as we have 3-year terms, I'm happy with this the way it is.
Vice Chair Rosen?
I believe this change, the writing of this particular statute represents what we talked about. And so I'm in favor of it, as I think we were when we finally ended the discussion, which is why the drafting went this way. So with that said, it reads the way that we discussed.
Okay, thank you. I view the overwhelming argument in favor of this to be that we should take, as I pointed out before, it just seems like a very short period of time when you get in office and you're getting your feet under yourself and then trying to do items and make connections to try to help the people of the town. It goes rather quickly. So I think that's the overwhelming argument in favor of altering the terms. I do have one question for the town attorney, and that is in terms of setting the clock on how this is implemented and who gets drawn under this at what point. So Glenn, if I could get some thoughts about that. What happens if this gets passed as it's worded? Does that mean everybody goes on the 12-year clock? And when does it take effect?
Well, those are good questions, and I would rather they be clarified than left open-ended. So either you could or the commission can ultimately decide, is this going to start with the election as of after the referendum, or is this going to be retroactively applied to a sitting commissioner? So if I've already served 2 terms, do I get to serve a 3rd term under this new one? I would think the answer is yes, but that might be a place to clarify that it goes into effect immediately, or it only goes into effect for people that are elected for the first time after this. So for example, if I've served one term now, do I get 3 more? Or do I only get 2 more for a total of 3? So I think that's a good clarification question. And as Ms. Rosen said, you guys didn't discuss that, and I tried to confine my writing to what you discussed and not start trying to guess where you wanted to go with this.
Okay, thank you. Town Manager Liberty.
Well, the attorney's here. I want to make sure. Dr. Greenwald asked a question. I think you can serve more than 12 if you are filling an unexpired term. So you could, you said 11 years. I think you could serve almost
Yeah.
14 and a half years if somebody went down early or resigned early in their term and somebody was filled in, they get to complete that term, and then they have 3 successive complete terms. Is that a correct
That's
reading?
my understanding.
Right, so you could make it to almost 12 years. 3 times 3 plus almost 3
Yes,
would be the maximum.
correct. Okay, I just want to
So
make
I-
sure we're on there.
So, yeah, I mean, at this point, I move that we accept this language with the addition that this go into effect when the referendum is passed.
I second.
And can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes,
Dr. Greenwald said when the referendum passed, that means it would start then.
That means if you've been elected for 1 term, you can be elected for 2 more consecutive terms,
So if the
for a
mayor
total of
served 1
3
term-
terms.
I think the point is that it would apply to those who are in office on the day that the referendum
Okay,
passes.
that's the question. Okay.
okay, we have a
Which would in
motion.
effect still give an extension to the people that are already in office. Because right now they can only serve 2 consecutive terms. So I think that would be a reasonable way to approach this. It would not be cutting anyone's tenure short, certainly, if we do it that way.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any continuing discussion? I would just, reflect that the town commission certainly has the prerogative to adjust whatever we recommend. So if they want to come back and address that implementation or anything, they certainly can. Okay, so I will ask the town clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Member Greenwald,
Yes,
Member Ty,
Yes.
Member Riami,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Rosen,
Yes,
and Chairperson Donaldson.
Yes,
Motion carries. Thank you.
thank you. Okay, moving on to section 107. This has to do with rules of procedure, quorum, and meetings. At this time, I would like to call on the town clerk who sent us a email regarding this topic. If you would please bring us up to speed on the response on this item.
That was
This had to do with the
the
quorums and meetings and the wording, shall versus should. And I believe the thought was that perhaps the town commission had already changed this by ordinance and were allowed to change it by ordinance.
Correct. They did adopt an ordinance to change it.
Okay. So unless there's further discussion, I really don't think we have anything on this one, so we can strike this one and move on.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Vice Chair.
I'll defer to the town attorney, but I think there is an issue. I believe that the commission can pass an ordinance to make something more restrictive, but not less restrictive than the charter. If we believe that the town council, the town commission should meet every month, shall meet every month, then we should change the charter in accord with this language to say so, regardless of the ordinance, because an ordinance can be repealed. We could go back to should very easily. So that's the question. If we feel strongly that the commission shall meet monthly, then it needs to be in the charter and not just the ordinance.
Would the town attorney like to weigh in on this? Would the town attorney please weigh in on this?
Would I like to? I'd like to know. I'd like to be very quiet and it's your guys' meeting, but, Member Rosen is correct. I mean, the charter is firmer in the sense of stronger than the ordinance. Ordinances can be changed more easily. The clerk is, as the clerk pointed out, the town commission has passed an ordinance saying shall. And if you remember in our first meeting, I talked about, the two theories of charters, minimalistic versus a lot in there. And this comes back to basically that philosophy. Do you want your charter to set a standard of should and give the commission the flexibility to decide shall? For example, the summertime, sometimes people take their vacations, and some commissions take the month of August off, for example, because they usually set a lot of budget stuff in June and July, and then they have the trim meetings in September, and some will take the month of August off. But with the word should, they've got that flexibility. With the word shall, they would not have that flexibility. So the question is, do you want to provide the flexibility to be able to skip a meeting a month for whatever reason? I use vacations as an example. I don't want to use the hurricane reason as a different example. I think most people would understand that if there was that kind of an emergency and you couldn't meet, but it's clearly up to you all whether you want to recommend that it should strengthen it as, yes, you shall meet once a month.
Okay, in that event, I'll open it up, Mr. Remy.
I just think it should be should rather than shall.
Yeah, I think through the common practice here, the commission meets more than once a month, right? Very regularly. So I agree with Ron that we should use the term should not shall. That means that can give the commission some flexibility because I saw through the agenda they meet more than once a month.
Dr. Bramwell?
I don't feel that strongly about this. I would actually go with the language shall. I think that charters are really designed to, in a sense, protect against worst case scenario type things, which would be a commission that just decides, you know what, we're not going to have any meetings. And should doesn't protect us from that. So certainly if we were starting from scratch, I would favor the language shall, but not one to go to the barricade. So
Okay. Vice Chair Rosen, anything further to add?
I really don't have anything further to add on this. I just want us to recognize that if we don't change this, then the ordinance can be changed in any way that the commission, the town commission wishes. Given the fact that we are in growth mode, I just think a little bit more, I'll call it conservatively, that we should maybe make this a shall rather than a should.
Okay, thank you. I tend to lead more to the language of should, only to give the town commission flexibility in their operations. But having said that, I would like to see if we have a motion to change the wording to shall, so we can reconcile this or come to some conclusion on this particular item. So I'll ask for a motion if there is one.
I will. I'll move that we change the language to shall.
And we have a second. Town clerk, if you could call the roll, please.
Member Greenwald,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Rosen,
Yes.
and Member Riami,
No.
Member Tai, and Chairperson Donaldson.
I'm going to go with no on this one. So the motion passes and it will go as a recommendation to the town commission.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I would say, if I might, in an example like this, it should be, as we make our recommendations to the commission, it should be clear that this was, shall we say, a weaker recommendation or a divided group or whatever. And same for any other items where we can't really come to a consensus.
Agreed. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to move on now to section 2019, dealing with fire and rescue protection. And this gets into the discussion regarding interlocal agreements. and how we approach this, what we want to include, what we don't want to include. I think that Vice Chairperson Rosen had really kind of hit on the three possibilities that were primarily under discussion. And that related to with essential services to either go with a straight 4/5 majority to enter those kinds of agreements, go through an automatic need for referendum, or go through the hybrid version of a supermajority with a holding period and the opportunity of voters to petition for a referendum. So, and there may be others, but I got the sense from the last meeting that's kind of where we had landed. So, having said that, and with the continuing discussion, we don't have proposed language today, but I would like to call on the members to continue the discussion. And we'll start. Dr. Greenwald, would you mind starting off on this one? We'll give Mr. Remy a break this time.
Okay. I feel that of the options that should the commission decide that for whatever the reasons that they wanted to transfer police, fire, rescue, or water out of the town's control via contract to another community, that should require a public referendum. The rest, I think the other rest that we considered was water. Was sewer. Sewer, as we pointed out, we have roughly half of the sewer budget is under our immediate control in terms of the pipes and collection system and lift stations in town. But then we also have a long-term interlocal contract that was discussed at the last Finance Committee meeting with the city of Delray, and has been pointed out, A, that's a good long-term contract, and B, I don't think anybody is particularly eager under any circumstances to start building sewage treatment plants in the city of Highland, in the town of Highland Beach. So I would be willing to leave that one off the list, and if we're going to change the charter, just restrict it to police, fire, rescue, and water. I think, unless I can be convinced otherwise, that if we just put in some generic other essential services type comment, that's going to make it more confusing than anything else. So I would restrict it to those three items, and I would, as I said, my personal preference would be that if that kind of action is contemplated, to require a referendum.
I would like to ask the town manager in terms of government contract. You know, what size of the contract in terms of dollars the government has to go through the voter referendum?
Not sure I understand the question. Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, the size of the contract in terms of dollars. First of all, 1 million, 2 million, or something like that, above certain, amount of dollars contract. The voter
So,
have to approve it.
so you're looking like, could there be a dollar amount
Yeah.
associated with those types of,
Government contract.
you could look at it, you could tie it to a funding limitation, kind of balance it that way, that if it exceeds whatever our funding limit is, you could use that as the amount. But I think it'd be difficult to pick an exact dollar amount because each service is a different animal. So if you include water with its debt, it could be a $10, $12 million contract in total that would be required. If you did fire, we're guessing fire is probably 4 million. If you did police, it's like 2.5. So I don't know that you could pick a number and hold that as the number, the threshold where you can go above or beyond on that. I don't know. It's an interesting proposition to say, do you just go by a cost figure, or a percentage of the budget. Because you'd get to one, but not the other potentially.
I don't think it's just a financial issue, though. I think it's a local control issue.
Mhm.
I think it's different. We're going to be talking the finance stuff for other projects later, obviously, in terms of limits. But I look at this as really a separate issue, how we treat, use the word I said not to, but how we treat essential services.
Mr. Remy?
I agree with Dr. Greenwald. I'm ambivalent about adding sewer. I don't see the harm in doing it. But one way or another, for sure, police, fire, and water, and perhaps sewer. And it, 100% by referendum.
Vice Chair Rosen?
I think for police, fire, water, I agree with Dr. Greenwald. I think the rest should remain exactly as it is today.
All right. I agree as well. I think referendum and keep sewer out of it, since we do not have full facilities. We're always going to have to leave the commission a little flexibility in how they approach that topic. With that being said, if I could get, I don't know if I need a motion or just a general consensus to direct the town attorney to draft up language. Yes, sir.
So your conversation between last meeting and this meeting kind of includes two different concepts. One, I think the way Dr. Greenwald phrased it is outsourcing, I'll call it, contracting away those three essential services, police, fire, or water, would require referendum. But then Dr. Todd was talking a little bit about interlocal agreements. So I want to be clear, you're not tying this to interlocal agreements, because theoretically you could contract this out not to another government. It could be, in some sense, for example, water could be contracted out to a private provider. So you don't want to limit it, I think, and I just want to confirm, you're not limiting this restriction to interlocal agreements. What you're saying is the town shall not contract out, outsource, whatever words we come up with, those three essential services without a voter approval. Is that correct? Is that what the intent is?
That's
Yes.
what I'm hearing.
Yes.
I believe that's correct. And I think the reasoning is that the rest of the contracts, I think we deem is sort of, I'll call it the normal course of business and within the parameters of the commission, of the town commission's authority. I think the reason for separating the other three were the prior discussions that we had at earlier meetings about the potential for outsourcing services that the community might not want outsourced at a particular time, and giving the community the chance to respond by a referendum on those.
And then we ask one more,
You can-
or a sale, right? A sale, an outsourcing, just, we need to keep those services within the town, or it's sale too.
I believe that's the sense of what we're asking in the language of a proposed referendum change.
So a corollary question, because again, I've seen this with different towns now, referendum. Is it a referendum all by itself, or is it a referendum plus a supermajority of the commission?
I agree.
I know we talked about that as well.
We talked
kind of
about
lost
that last
topic.
week or last time. And we talked about, as we said, the supermajority or a supermajority in a waiting period to see if a referendum arises. And I think that's the discussion that remains to be concluded.
Or, I think I see Dr. Greenwald, or supermajority plus a referendum being required, almost like a double. You can't outsource, you can't sell, you can't contract out these services unless both the commission agrees, whether majority vote or supermajority, and there's a referendum. Or is it just a referendum? Like, for example, if the commission doesn't believe this should be done, but there's a petition and the people vote for it, then you're cutting the commission out of the process.
Well, the citizens always have the right to raise a petition to put an item on a referendum. So,
Unless you're changing your charter to say in this particular, and I'm not advocating.
no,
for
I
this,
hear
I'm
you.
just,
I hear you.
yeah.
That, I guess I'm arguing why we shouldn't
right.
do that.
And I'll sit down in terms of no argument here. It's just a
Okay.
question of should it be just the right of the citizens or the right of both?
Mr. Tai?
Yeah, I think I should jump in this case. We have two things here. The first one, privatization, contracting out certain function of the government. When we make that decision, privatization or keep that in-house, I would like to have a voter referendum. But for a function which has been privatized, and now the government, the town, look for a contractor to bid for that project or that function once a while, then that is the so-called contract. And under the contract, I don't know whether the voter should get involved into this case, or we should should rely on the judgment of the town manager and the town commission. So I agree with Dr. Greenwald that we, in terms of privatization, are getting back from private sector to put under the government control, like a fire department contracting out. Now we are thinking of making it as a function of the government. Then that may be a kind of decision from the voter referendum to see whether we should bring back the fire department, fire function. I hope my explanation is pretty clear. Two different things: privatization or not privatization, and then contracting.
Would we like to request the town attorney to draw up two options relating to this? Or do we feel strongly about one direction? Oh. Mr. Remy first.
I feel strongly about one option, that it should just be a referendum by the voters.
Okay. Dr. Remo.
Yeah, I was going to move that we suggest to the commission pretty much what I said originally, which was that we can't, looking for the appropriate word, but outsource police, fire rescue, and water without a public referendum.
Vice Chair Rosen.
I think the question that's being raised is not using the term outsource, but if there's going to be a change in control of police, fire, water, that I think the suggestion is from Dr. Greenwald that that be done only by referendum.
Correct.
I would tend to agree with that, but I think that it needs to be clear. It's a change of control, regardless of which way it's going.
Okay. And you have a motion on that, actually, directing the
Yeah,
town
that's, and
attorney to.
with
draft
that
language.
clarification, that's,
Okay, may I have a second?
Second.
Second.
We have a second. Town clerk, could you read the roll on this motion?
Member Greenwald,
yes.
Member Riami,
Yes.
Member Tai,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Rosen,
Yes.
and Chairperson Donaldson.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so at the next meeting, we'll look to get specific language on that provision we can take under consideration. Thank you. Okay, next up is section 20130, funding limitation. And I think we all have a pretty good idea of what this is about. The town currently has a $350,000. I make note, Mayor Hillman is making a special request to address the group without objection. I'd like him to approach the podium.
Thank you. I promised I wasn't going to say anything, but I feel it's necessary. Control is the key. I'm backing up on the subject. Mrs. Rosen was spot on. The control factor is management control. It's not financial control. Ron was in the financing business for many years. We might make a deal with someone where we sell them the assets, but we lease it back. And we maintain control of the operation, but we don't own it anymore. So by definition, depending on how this is written, we still control it. So hypothetically, it's the fire department, or better yet, it's the water plant. We don't own the water plant anymore, but we employ the people and we run it. And whatever the financial arrangement is, it might be some shared revenue, it might be a royalty, it might be whatever. But we no longer own that plant, but we control it. So we have to work out the definition of what control means. So I don't think you're done with the subject yet. That's my point.
I agree. And,
Okay,
and I think change of control needs to be defined.
Mhm.
And I'll ask the town attorney to consider what that means. I think it's not necessarily the financial control, it's the control in totality. So we need to look at perhaps some of the private world change of control language. I think you may find something very useful there.
Okay, thank you. All right, shifting over to the fiscal limits and the current limitation versus any recommendation we would like to make regarding suggested modifications on the funding limitation. We do have, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to back up here a second. We do have a language proposal that would change the 350,000 to 10% of the town's combined operating and enterprise fund budgets in any given fiscal year. And that is a bit of the direction that I kind of got also out of the last meeting. So I'm going to open that up again for a discussion to see how we feel about that language at this point. Mr. Remy will shift back over to you.
This is a step in the right direction. This is a minimum in my opinion that it should be. I don't, once again, as I mentioned previously, we're the only town that I can find that really has anything like this. Basically, everything is unlimited. Obviously, we have to maybe nurse the town along on this issue, and I can see 10% of the combined fund budgets would give the commission certainly a lot more latitude than they have right now. When you look at the items that are generally purchased, probably most of them will fall within that. But not doing anything about this, and this is a minimum, is, it really hamstrings a town commission in terms of what they can do. And there seems to be discussion out there in some sections of the town that giving the commission authority like this, and it's been defeated in the past. Obviously, this has to go to referendum, but I think people are just being very short-sighted, not wanting to give up control to the commission. And I just think that's wrong. You've elected the people. If you don't like the way they're governing, then you should elect somebody else. But to not allow a commission to do their job on a daily basis, to, like in the case now, we're going to be buying big fire trucks and the like, and to have to go to a referendum every time something like this is needed just seems totally ludicrous to me. And people bring up, what happened in previous commissions when we had a $45 million proposal, and that proposal was defeated. But in addition, there was a change in the commission. So people can speak their mind, and if they don't like something, they certainly can make a change in the commission. But I just think this is a minimum.
Mr. Tai?
Yeah. I am a little bit concerned about 10% of the combined operating and enterprise fund budget. Normally, when we talk about the budget, we talk about operating budget. Enterprise funds, I don't know how big the size of enterprise funds in this town. But if we add the enterprise funds to the operating budget, that means that is a huge 10%. So I would suggest that we should consider, whether we allow 10% of the operating budget only, not all the funds. Because in the government fund structure, the general fund is the basic one. And all the funds are self-supporting, like a public enterprise fund or all the fund. I don't know what else we have here in this town. So I would suggest that the 10% of the operating budget, not including the enterprise fund.
Town Manager Laverty, would you like to refresh our memories on approximate scale of economies in those two items?
So your general fund's probably about 13 million was we're getting. So you're talking 10% would be about 1.2 million. All combined funds are about 21. So you're talking about 2 million, 2.1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about a $750,000 difference between 10% of operating or 10% of combined.
And could you clarify also that within the context of the enterprise fund budgets, some of those monies also get plowed back in for repairs, maintenance, critical items?
Certainly, we do budget to add to reserves as we can on a year-to-year basis, and that's built into the water and sewer structure. But I would clarify, just because they're enterprise fund, they're still controlled by this charter measure. And that's generally where we see a lot of the large expenditures. So just keep that in mind as you go back and forth. Should you do combined funds or just the general operating? We can't make the assumption that the enterprise can operate independently. The operating of the enterprise funds, which are water and sewer, have to comply with the charter as well. So if you say operating, that means in a water project, we could only spend 1.2 versus 2 million. So.
Yes.
Actually, according to the governmental accounting standard board, we cannot move money from one fund to another fund. Enterprise fund is for enterprise fund. We cannot touch it. We cannot move it to general fund or the general budget. And in that sense, if we move money around among funds, we would violate the GASB accounting principle. And that is a serious violation.
I don't get the sense that we're actually moving funds, Mr. Laverty.
No, we're not moving funds. You're correct. You can't switch between funds unless you justify the expense. So if there's administrative charge for managing the enterprise fund, you can do a transfer or administrative charge transfer between funds. But you're correct. You can't collect money in the sewer fund and just use and pay for the clerk's office. or the manager's office. You have to justify the expenditure out. So you keep it in it's fund accounting. So enterprise fund is isolated from the general operating fund. That's correct.
I mean, this is simply, you want to buy a fire truck, costs $3 million. If you do it, maybe, that's probably too much, but okay, so at least there's a chance that if you combine the fund budgets, that you're going to be able to buy an expensive fire truck without going to the town and asking them if it's okay.
Dr. Grimwell.
I'm afraid I'm going to be even a little bit more loquacious than usual on this one. I've probably thought a little bit too much about spending. And when all is said and done, I really don't know what to recommend. And I think, as you've figured by now, that's unusual for me because I can usually come up with something that I'm comfortable with recommending. And this one's hard. I think that with all the discussions we've had, we've agreed on our goals, which is something. And I think our first goal is that we want to enable adequate spending limits so that the commission can do its job with reasonable governments. And I think we've all felt that the $350,000 limit is too restrictive for them to be able to do that. So we want to do something. At the same time, I think that most of us, at least, want to have something in the charter that ensures that there's no potential for runaway spending. And I think, we have an example where 94% of the people in town feel that the referendum is what saved us from a $45 million expenditure. So I think we have to keep both of those into account in whatever solutions we may come up with. There are a few facts. One is that, as Ron correctly pointed out, when you go look around, other towns don't have any of these kinds of limits. They trust their governance to take care of it, plus whatever safeguards they may have in the system. So we have to ask ourselves, why is that? Are they just more trusting? Are they just less involved? Or is it just hard to really come up with some consistent way to limit it like we've been trying to do, either with percentages or fixed numbers? The second fact that we've uncovered is that we have significant other safeguards that are built into our system. One is that the budget must be balanced every year. Two, that anytime we want a bond issue, it has to go for referendum. And three, tax increases by the commission are limited, although in our charter, it's actually limited to 10 mils, which would be almost a 300% increase over what our current tax rate is. The other thing the commission could theoretically do if they were so disposed is they could probably blow through our reserve fund if they wanted to and still have a balanced budget. I think there's whatever there is, $6 million or something in the reserve fund. So those are all, facts that are out there as we try to come up with some solution. The problems that I'm having in deciding is what we've seen when we have fixed limits is the games people play or the efforts that the commission has had to make over time to try and get around the limits by either splitting projects, redefining projects, calling projects things other that they're not, by saying, well, this is really maintenance and not a project, or vice versa. And the biggest problem to me is how we define these things. So again, and we've had examples like this, and whenever I discuss this with anyone, they come up with other examples, and you can stretch it out as much as you like, but you want a $2 million sidewalk, walkway beautification project. So how do you define that? Is that a $2 million project? Can you do it over 3 years? So it's a little less than $700,000 a year project. Can you break it into pieces? Here's a $50,000. No, it's not a beautification project. We're just planting $50,000 worth of trees. Well, we're just relining $30,000 worth of sidewalk, but it's not a $2 million project. There's just too many games that people can play. And I don't know what the answer is. I can't answer any of those questions when people say, well, it's a new fire truck. That's not maintenance, that's capital, it's $1 million. But yeah, suppose we spread it out, we do other things, or we just replace the transmission for $250,000 this year and do the engine for $300,000 next year. I mean, it becomes where it's impeding good governance when we start doing that. But I don't have an answer to how to define any of those things. And whenever people ask me, I can't necessarily, even though I vaguely know, which is capital, which is maintenance, which is operations, which one is a new project, how do you define that project? And I don't think, based on what I've seen, that we can rely on the old Potter Stewart definition that we'll recognize it when we see it. Because I think when we look at these, at least in my discussions with people, we're not necessarily seeing the same thing or defining them the same way. So unless our attorney can somehow figure that out in terms of language, how we define all these things, I'm not sure how we get this done. It's been pointed out that whatever percentage we come up with, whether it's the operating fund or all funds, whether it's 7.5%, 10%, 7.5% of one, 10% of the other, whatever those numbers should be, that's going to have built-in escalation because of inflation and also increasing escalation, not only just due to normal inflation, but as budgets, new projects, et cetera, increase. That number is going to keep going up. And do we want that to happen? So having said all of that and raised more questions than I've answered because I just don't have the answers, if I were pushed at this point to recommend something, because we're going to have to recommend something when all is said and done, and I would be extraordinarily easily dissuaded from anything that I'm about to say, I would recommend a tiered system. So I would recommend that what we do is we have a $500,000 limit for the commission for a new project or a line item. It would be nice if we could get some definition as to what line items were. I would increase that limit to 700,000, making that up. If that particular line item or project is voted for by a supermajority of the commission. And I would increase it to $1 million if that particular line item or project was voted for by the commission plus the financial advisory board and the planning board. So it would be a tiered approval system. Anything over $1 million would go to referendum. And I recognize that there's serious flaws because what I just outlined has the same flaws as any of the previous systems, like how do we define a line item, what's a project, and all the kind, can it be spread out over 3 years? And all the things I mentioned before, which may be why so many towns don't have limits. And as Ron said, if you don't like what the commission's doing, we have safeguards with bond issues, et cetera, and you vote people out of office if you don't like it. I don't know that our town is ready to accept that, though, at this point. And one of the things we've talked about, I would like to see whatever our recommendations are, whatever the commission ultimately decides, I would like to see it go through a referendum successfully. So a lot of talking, not too many conclusions, but that's where I am at this point. This is the hardest one by far, obviously.
Vice Chair Rosen.
I appreciate all those comments, but I think your conclusion at the end is very important. The reason that we elect commissioners is to govern. And if we don't like how they govern, the role is to vote them out. I do have some concerns about amounts, but I think that when we discussed this the last time, the total of the 10 and the 7.5 created a nice cap for which the commission would have authority and the manager would have authority. And yes, it grows, and I understand that. And yes, I understand that one could design projects in pieces and basically be able to do something different. But I think the protections are in terms of the bond, the other protections that you mentioned, plus ultimately the right to vote for the commissioners at election time. I do think that as the town grows and becomes more sophisticated, I don't mean that as an insult to people who want to control things, just that we have a lot more sophisticated projects to deal with, particularly if we're going to take over fire and rescue. I think that it's critical that the commission have the flexibility to deal with that within some limits. And I think the percentages recognize that our budgets will continue to grow. And I think that's a good thing, but I think that percentage-wise, it maintains a limit on how we control the expenditures that can be done with discretion and those that can't be done with discretion. So I go back to the recommendation. I support Ron in terms of the amounts, and that's it.
Thank you. My overwhelming concern is that we look at this limit in terms of, number one, the future and how we set this at a level that will allow us to allow the commission to function properly. And secondly, that we do nothing to unduly restrict the commission in carrying out those basic responsibilities for life, health, safety, and welfare. And certainly down the road, we are going to be facing some more sizable expenditures in order to deliver those services. We know that. So, and in the interest of keeping it as simple as we can, I'm preferring to back this as it's currently written with 10% of the town's combined operating and enterprise fund limits. I don't want to restrict it to just one because I sincerely don't think over a 10-year period that's going to prove to be enough. Or at least give the commission enough flexibility to address a multiplicity of items that may come to their attention. So I'm leaning to actually supporting it as written. In order to address this item, I think we should open up the floor for a motion and a vote.
I make a motion. Go ahead.
Town attorney?
If I may, I might step out of my normal role a little bit. I'll try to maintain my role as your impartial advisor, but with your permission, I'd like to go a little bit beyond this because Dr. Green, you've all said things that hit different nails on the head. And one of Dr. Greenwald's point was, there's different ways of defining projects and line items. And what, as a little bit of a history buff, what I've always found very difficult to reconcile in my own mind is in 1991, I think that was the year this got enacted. It was the very same year the commission voted to do a fire rescue contract that far exceeded the $350,000. So on the left hand, they put this cap out there. On the right hand, they exceeded it by, I think it was almost a $3 million contract. And my predecessor at the time issued an opinion that, no, that was okay. That wasn't one project or an extension of projects. So to your point, was he finding a way around that limitation, or was that a legitimate interpretation? I tend to think it was legitimate interpretation. But to your point, you don't want to set up something that's unworkable. And just as Dr. Greenwald, I may go longer than I usually do and get a little bit philosophical, because one of the things in this 350,000 limitation, it then has an exception at the end for natural catastrophes, unforeseen mischance, bringing with it the destruction of life. And I'm going back to that fire rescue 1991. Should there be an exception that says, except for the essential services, except for fire, rescue, police, or water? Is that outside? And that goes a little bit to Marshall's enterprise fund concept, that enterprise funds are generally outside of general funding. So do you have a limit for a lot of things, whether it's 10%, 7.5% general fund, enterprise fund? But do you include in the exception something that you're about to do, because you're about to start a fire department that we all know is going to be in that $3 to $4 million range? Automatically you're going over the 10% cap, right? 10% is $2 million. The first thing out of the box. I'll be doing the same thing Mrs. Sliney did 30 years ago, coming up with an opinion that says it's okay. But so I just want you to think about those kind of concepts. You pass something that you're immediately going to have something else, another referendum item that says we're going to establish a fire department that we know is going to cost more than the limit. So just different. I don't have a solution either. I'm like you, Doc. You know, lots of concerns. How do you all come up with this where everybody from mayors to managers to attorneys are doing gymnastics to try and have the town move forward? $350,000 30 years ago. I mean, I'm thinking about was a gallon of gas 30 years ago. You know, so we're limiting ourselves. So one suggestion would be, whatever you do, have an escalator like the 10% of the budget that will move, and think about maybe just accepting out certain essential services, whether it's all three in that category or whether it's just fire or just police. So that's my 2 cents of stepping out of my box.
Don't leave.
Okay.
My question is that when we have a referendum, and we're going to have a referendum about fire services, fire and rescue services, at least for that, should we declare that that's an essential service, create the reference to the spend in the referendum so that at least for the immediate near term, that part is addressed? Does that get to what you're saying, Glenn?
Well, that kind of begs that question.
Or, yeah,
It does beg that question of how do you,
or, you know, do you need it? Does one need to think about needing that exception in the charter? If we're going to have a fiscal limitation, then perhaps you're right. We need to look at the way that the exceptions are written in the particular provision of the charter. I don't know whether it's for essential services or some similar language, but I guess what I want to avoid is to double dip. I don't want the fire rescue referendum to include sort of the okay for what this is all going to cost, and then put in the charter a similar exception for what it's going to cost. I just want to make sure that we're defining this in separate columns.
agreed, and stepping back, if you have a fire rescue referendum that passes, I think it's easy for any lawyer to give the opinion that when the people voted for whatever funding limitation you ultimately decide, and they also voted for fire rescue, they inherently are creating an exception. You know, you'd like it to be maybe a little more defined, but you can't ask people to vote for two things and they approve both and they conflict with each other. And that's where I think Tom, 30 years ago, in his back of his head, he didn't put that in writing, but I think that's where he was going, is there's no way in the world you could vote for, we're going to do this and do this. That makes no sense. So I agree with you. How do you reconcile those things? And is it, I wouldn't want the fire rescue, frankly, to pass, and I'll step in Marshall's shoes, and then say, still keep the 350 cap, because then the rest of the town is still hamstrung. You don't want, it's almost like you're a loss leader at the supermarket. You go in there and you buy that nice shiny fire truck, and you don't get the bread and milk you need to feed your kids. And the 350 makes it hard for him to feed the kids.
Well, but isn't that the discussion that we had at the last session when we talked about the 10% of the combined budgets? As the budgets grow, Marshall, isn't that where you were coming from, or did I misunderstand that?
I'll try to do my best to recall, but basically we had the conclusion that most expenditures would be covered by the 10% of the combined funds. There wasn't a lot of expenditures we couldn't handle now and growing into the future outside of some exception, some crazy exception. Those could be handled with a cap. At the same time, I do like the concept of, I know that staff, we've had that conversation. At least I've had department heads come to me, please ask them to exclude water, police, and now fire. Keep those out of the cap because those operations have big time costs from time to time. Now, if you put a 10% cap in on all funds, we'll be able to handle pumps, motors, engines, fire trucks, cars, bullets, tasers. We'll be able to handle most of those big ticket items. It doesn't authorize us to form the department. I mean, if you made a full exception, you wouldn't need both potentially, you wouldn't need both referendums. We could potentially just go with this funding, exclude fire. But again, then you would still have the extension of services, and that's kind of tricky. And I don't think any of us want to go to the voters and say we're trying to gamesmanship on that. That's why we're going for the authorization to start the fire department open-ended to let people know that we're doing this. Please be on board. We want your support. I think the 10% cap is workable. Again, I could talk to my colleagues around the country and nobody has caps, but outside of naturally imposed caps, because you can't generate enough money to cover your budget. But, it's a challenge and it's come up with that language. And I don't think that we try to work our way around it. We just try to figure out a way to satisfy that goal. I don't know if that's kind of a wordsmith on that too. But it is 350 is becoming unworkable. I implore you to at least give full consideration to some increase of that 350. That's not a workable number. Barely now, but moving in the future, that number is just, it's going to be difficult to operate.
Yes.
I just want to clarify. Okay, so if under the referendum, if we had this separate, call it 10%, the combined budget, that's not necessarily going to. So, but another part of the referendum is you're going to have create a fire department. Okay. So that's okay, right? Because as you say, assuming they approve both, let's say, or even if, they don't approve the funding, but in terms of the 350 increase, but they approve the fire department, you could create the fire department and, spend, $10 million, whatever it is. So that's okay.
Correct.
So we can keep them separate, just so in other words, so it's just us knowing that there will be some things like that. So I don't know that, is it really necessary to exclude the fire, water, and police if things like that are going to be?
I just wanted to have the conversation. I wanted you to at least have that conversation and think about how those three big ticket, you've had that conversation about these are essential services. Are those essential services going to be put in any different category than anybody else? There's lots of different ways to look at it. Again, I don't know what it costs to run a water plant, but it's an enterprise fund. You're limited by the enterprise fund amount. And so this funding limitation puts an unnatural cap on what an enterprise fund is. I'm running a business. I'm selling M&Ms. I can sell as many M&Ms as I want. I can't sell, or I can't buy enough to sell more than a certain amount. So the enterprise fund part of it was always puzzling as well. How enterprise funds, which are supposed to be self-generating, self-producing, self-sustaining, are subject to this artificial number.
Well, I can see that. Well, once again, I'm strongly in favor of at least the 10% combined. And yes, it would go up annually, assuming that the budgets are going to go up. But at the same time, fire trucks keep going up and everything else keeps going up. So you really need to have it at least in, not a fixed number of 350 grand or 500 or $1 million, but a percentage of the budget. So it is going to increase with inflation or whatever, based on what the budget is doing. And once again, you got to move out of the dark ages. You can't, if you, as we talked about, if you're unhappy with the commission, you bring in a new commission. But you have to be able to operate the town, and you have to, people, as Eve mentioned, you have to, people in the town need to give up control. 350 grand in this town is nothing. They need to stop, they grow up, let the town commission run. And if you don't like that commission, get a new one. But to stop them from operating and putting them in a position, as you mentioned also, Dr. Greenwald, of where we have to play games. We have to divide it up. We have to say, well, okay, well, this was a tire and that's an engine. This was last year. This is this year. Stop it. Let's grow up, be big kids, move on, approve this. So I'm, want to make a motion, in some way that we approve the 10% of combined budgets with the exclusion of those three items: police, fire, and water.
Yes, Mr. Time.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think the
actually,
350 was,
sorry.
dates back, I think, 20 years. Because it didn't come up in the last 10 years ago. So if it goes back 20 years, it very well may have been 10% of the budget 20 years ago. So if you end up proposing that, you might be proposing what was done 20 years ago. But the reason I came up here was when you end up with your list of proposals, it would be very helpful to the commission if you would prioritize those. Because as you were saying earlier, I forgot who said it, but you want to get it down to a handful that would end up actually going to the voters. So if we can look at those and know what your priorities are, it would be very helpful. Okay. Excuse me. There was one other point I wanted to make. Oh, in terms of the 10%, you have to recognize that, and it's been said a couple of times, Marshall and his staff and the commission is going to be operating with the addition now of a very large additional service, that being fire. And not so much that we're dealing with fire rescue, but we're dealing with the safety and the health of our residents. And as much as one will be able to try to project needs, but you're not going to be able to project all of the needs on a scheduled basis. And if, for example, we had a $500,000 ceiling as opposed to the $350 now, and there was a need for a $600,000 ambulance, we can't wait 6 months to get it. Can't wait 3 months. Sometimes you can't wait 2 months. I'm not saying you can build a new ambulance in 2 months, but we're not going to be able to service the needs of the community with low numbers. Not when we're dealing with the health and safety of the community. Now that we're going to have fire with us as well. So the needs to spend at larger amounts will be heightened significantly once fire comes on. Now that's not tomorrow, but it's 2.5 to 3 years from now. 3 years from now, because what, 3 months have already gone by. So we're on a 36-month calendar. We've
Down to
eaten up
33.
3 months already.
Yep.
So we're 33 months away. So whatever is decided, I don't know, we could live with $1 million, $1.2 million, but 2 million would really take care of things. Second thing is, the commission will begin to determine very quickly whether these questions are going to go on the November or the March cycle. So if it doesn't go on the early cycle, we might put fire only on it. And if that's the case, then all of these questions don't go on until March. So once that decision is made, and it'll be made probably by middle of next month.
At the latest. I think I gotta have Glenn start writing language sooner. Because I think the supervisor of elections is gonna want the full language for a ballot on that special election, thinking mid-August. Yeah, they'll want it in their hands, so you have to act before. So
So
yeah,
we'll make it in the next
couple weeks, yeah.
couple of weeks. So as soon as we know, we'll tell you. So you may have more time if you need it. That's the point I wanted to let you know. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add to this one, in terms of budget management. The budget has to be balanced. That is one major restriction. And if we impose more restrictions on the government, I think we would eliminate the ability of the administration to manage their government. I would like to see less restriction in this case. Earlier in the first meeting, I suggest that we should eliminate the fund limitation because we have the budget control there. Annually, the commission has the budget proposed, and then after the budget is approved, the administration manage the operation within the budget as required by the balanced budget. So if we need to impose some kind of limitation, I would like to give a little bit more flexibility, in terms of suggested amount, 500, 700, or $1 million. I think those amount at the moment is that good value, but how about 9, 10 years from now? The value is less, so we should not link the fund limitation to the fixed amount of dollars. If we need to impose some limitation, I would like to suggest that 10% is a pretty good reflecting the inflation throughout the year.
Vice Chair Rosen.
I don't want to step on the toes of the drafting of the referendum for fire and rescue, but I think what I was trying to ask earlier is whether the language for establishing fire and rescue could include the appropriate language which indicates that the referendum is approving the necessary expenditures for those essential services. If that occurs, then my question to the manager is, knowing that you've gotten the startup funds to buy the ambulances, the fire trucks, the building, the whatever, because that's the necessary funds to stand up the fire and rescue department on our own. Given our budget today, which includes payment for fire services, as well as payment for other essential services, can you confirm that in your best sense that the 10% of the combined budgets is workable for Highland Beach, at least for the next 10 years?
I would
Or
say,
at least maybe even 5.
I would say, yeah, I think the 10% of the combined funds is a workable number over the next charter review period where you have to open it up again. I think that number is workable. And it also recognizes the constraint that the community is going to want in some level. You've all touched on it. The situation that occurred before, I don't know that we can remove some type of constraint, but that's a functional constraint that would work on a full service operation, recognizing big ticket items. I will have all of, like you said, all of those items based on the authorization, which I hope the community is supporting, would give us the dollars to get the startup stuff. So yes.
Thank you. If I could just throw in a couple of comments along the way here. I still think our best approach is the simplest approach. I'm a little concerned about trying to get into defining essential services because you're going to find people who think the library is an essential service. When you're crafting a budget for a town, speaking from my experience, when you're looking at those numbers, there aren't a lot of fun projects going on in those numbers. Each one of them is tied to something that's extremely important and very vital to this town. To try to narrow this down or put restrictive language in there, I think is going to work against us in the minds of the people who will be voting on this referendum. I think we just need to keep this as simple and as clear as we can. And certainly in our discussions up here, I see nothing arbitrary about this 10%. We are very much tying this to an understanding about what we feel to be the single biggest important appropriation on a piece of equipment or other significant thing that does have to do with health and safety of the town. And that we're permitting that to fluctuate as a percentage with the budget. So it is in that way organic. So I'm still very much in favor of leaving this as written and pass this on to the commission with that recommendation. If they care to tweak it any further, they certainly can. But I think this is the clearest approach trying to reconcile this very difficult issue. Dr. Greenwald.
I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah, a couple of comments. Number one, fire rescue, I always kind of assumed was going to have its own referendum and possibly, if we were at that stage, at some point may require a bond issue, I would think, it's to get started. So that's going to be, I think, unless there's some creative wording, is going to be somewhat separate than the rest of what we're talking about here. It's going to be a one-off, in other words. Again, I haven't seen anything to suggest what the bond issue would be, but it just seemed like between fixing the building, all the fire equipment, everything else that we're going to need, that we might require either a bond issue or really heavily utilizing reserves or a very significant tax rate, but one or the other. So I guess my question here is, I can certainly live with this, although I get the impression that what most people here are saying is that we're moving into a new era and we really don't want particular limits beyond what, or at least particular line item limits, or much of them, beyond what we're already safeguarded by having to have a balanced budget and having referendums for bond issues and so on and so forth. Because as I vaguely recall, by the time we get done with the combined enterprise fund budgets and the normal operating budget, we're at what, $1.8 million or something per line item, $1.6 million, something like that, wasn't it?
For all combined, it'd probably be a little over $2 million.
All right, $2 million. And we're really talking about per line item. It very nicely says project here, but as it's been pointed out innumerable times today and previously, no one's defining what a project is. So it really breaks down into line items, which is pretty much, I guess, getting pretty close to unlimited spending unless you decide that you're buying a really fancy new fire truck or whatever. So I'm not sure what we're doing. Maybe all these other towns have it right and they just don't talk about limits and they just have their other safeguards in place. I do think that there's going to be a significantly divided electorate, which it's going to be interesting to see, I think, if, as this goes out there, how popular it'll proved to be. And, you know, some of us feel that, well, the enlightened people will clearly see the light and do it, and other people may not. But I've spoken to it's not a fair sampling, but a few people. And people seem to be somewhat tied to some sort of meaningful limits. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong. I mean, clearly, as we've talked about, other towns don't do it this way. And as you said, you don't like what the commissioners are doing, you vote them out. And we have additional safeguards. It'll be interesting to see. I think once we get up around 10%, so now we're talking about $2 million a line item, we're pretty much getting to where we're abolishing spending limits anyway, for practical purposes. That's okay, but I think we should recognize that the people that are interested are going to be smart enough to look at the numbers and figure out that that's what's happening. Big difference between 2 million a line item and 350,000 a line item.
I don't think anything should be hidden, and this thing needs to be sold to the electorate. And they need to understand that if they want the town to operate, and if they want to look at what do other towns do and how do things work, and they need to step away from trying to having each individual person in this town control what goes on through funding. They need to, as we say, elect a commission, have them run things, and if they don't like it, elect a different one. And they need to get away from trying to control every penny. And there's certain people around this town, as they did on some of the previous projects, spreading, false information, like they used to say, which was not true when they, in the $45 million project, that the town couldn't afford it, that the town credit rating couldn't afford it. And the fact is we know the town can afford, our credit rating is as high as you can get. We can borrow whatever money we need. So that's not a reason to not approve something. If you don't like it, great. Just say, I don't want to do this. It's too much money. Fine, don't approve it. But spreading false information, as some individuals out there who are probably watching right now have been doing, is wrong. We need to make this change. It needs to be sold to the community. I'd like to make a motion that we take the language, that's the change here, the 10% of the town's combined operating and enterprise fund budgets.
We have a second. Any further discussion? There being none, if the town clerk would call the roll.
Member Riami,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Rosen,
Yes.
Member Ty, Member Greenwald,
I abstain.
you can't, you either have to, no, you cannot.
I vote no.
Okay, and Chairperson Donaldson,
Yes,
motion carries 4-1.
thank you. Okay, moving on to the section 302, payment of lawful debts. And we had a number of items under discussion, but we have received back a proposed language to modify the payment of lawful debts, deleting the reference to commissioner and the finance director, but adding a commissioner shall sign checks in the absence of the town manager. And that's the nature of the change we have under discussion. If I could open this with a question, am I reading this correct, that
Okay.
it would only require one signature, that of the town manager, on any checks? I thought we were setting it, are we not currently at two currently?
Two.
Two, So would this change it back to one?
The finance director, yeah, and I was confused frankly with your discussion on this and I wasn't sure where you were going. So I thought where
Okay.
the reason I had to struck out the finance director is because the town manager is not available, then the finance director shouldn't be the one issuing the check and signing the check.
Agreed.
So you need to have that balance. But since the finance director is drawing the checks and then signed by the manager, I wasn't sure if you wanted them signed by the manager and a commissioner. So yeah, this is not my best language because I really wasn't clear on where you were going with this one.
Okay, we'll take that up then. Mr. Redmond?
I'd like to see it that the town manager, assuming it takes two signatures, that the town manager and the finance director, or the town manager and a commissioner can sign the checks. But that definitely the town manager and the finance director by themselves can sign all checks.
Yeah, I thought we pretty much agreed on this one, that it was going to be out of the hands of the commissioners and that in the hands of the finance officer and the town manager would be responsible for signing checks, since there are two bonded people.
Yeah.
Then a commissioner.
Then a
One
commissioner can sign it.
So all you gotta do is add after town manager and finance director, and then say a commissioner shall sign in the absence of the town manager.
Okay.
Are we looking at something that would say checks will be valid only when signed by the town manager and the finance manager?
How about just any of the two,
And-
any two of either the town manager, the finance director, or a commissioner? Yeah, you need,
I think the problem with that is that you want the finance director to be primarily responsible for signing checks, to be seconded by the town manager. And if you need something when one of the town manager or the finance director is unavailable, you want one commissioner to be able to sub in so that you still have two signatures, not 42 signatures, but two signatures. But I think to your point is that we want the finance director to have the responsibility because of the availability of the financial system.
okay.
I think that's where we were.
Okay.
Are we able to craft that on the spot and take it under consideration, or would you like more time?
So I think where it's going to say then is, starting with that second sentence, the finance director will draw checks only on the basis of duly approved invoices, claims, or payrolls, which checks will be valid only when signed by the town manager and finance director, period. And then I think we skip down, in the absence or inability of either the town manager or the finance director, the signature of one town commissioner is authorized.
That's it.
Work?
Move we approve that pending final
And
reading.
I'll bring it back next meeting and you can.
Well,
Double approve it.
but that says in the absence or inability of both
I think we'll take the
to
word,
sign. So you would just say
Either.
one or the
Either.
other, or either.
take both or put in the word either. So in the absence or inability of either the town manager or the finance director, the signature of one member of the town commission, rather than is authorized, I think it needs to say is required.
Okay.
And it may need a little more playing with it, but I understand now what you're saying. Manager and finance director is primary. In the absence of either one of those, there's got to be a commissioner. I don't hear you saying that if both of them are absent, two commissioners can sign. I think you always want one of those administrative folks signing. Is that correct?
That would be my preference.
Yeah.
I don't know about
That's
the
the
other
discussion
members.
we had.
That's what I, okay. All right.
All right.
So So Dr. Greenwald already make motion, I second it.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. If the town clerk would call the roll, please.
Member Greenwald,
Yes.
Member Ty,
Yes.
Member Riami, Vice Chairperson Rosen,
Yes.
and Chairperson Donaldson.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, moving on to section 3.05, salaries of commissioners and mayor. We had a provision that was adopted by ordinance when it should have been adopted by voter referendum. The indication from the town attorney is that the language may stay the same. It simply needs to be approved by referendum. I'll open that up for discussion or a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that the referendum approve, or that it goes to a referendum, the language to be approved, that salaries, the change is approved by a referendum.
Do we have a second? We have a second. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, I had raised the possibility the last time that these salary changes that were self-voted on by the commission would not go into effect for an individual commissioner until they had been elected with that salary change in place. So in other words, they would be eligible for it for their next term, but they could not vote themselves an increase in salary during their present term. They could vote for it, but it wouldn't pertain to them until they were reelected, thereby giving the voters a share in the decision-making process, if you will. Now, I recognize fully that Congress and other governmental organizations, including many surrounding communities, do not do that, and they allow for town commissions to just raise their own salaries. There are examples in other communities that do something very similar to what I just outlined, however, which would be what I would favor.
Yeah, I like that observation, but at the same time, I question about what if they would like to raise them their salary with based on inflation? Should that kind of small increase be approved by the voters? I asked Dr. Greenswald.
My personal preference is that we don't put cost of inflation or CPI increases in anybody's salary automatically. But I mean, obviously, it's not an uncommon practice, but I wouldn't do it. So I don't think that should be automatically part of their salary, annual increases like for Social Security or whatever. So again, personal preference, but I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, actually, I agree with that because, I think people serve on the commission for the sake of public service more than for the money. So I would like to go along with that to avoid the kind of abuse of some cases like in many other cities.
I again want to try to avoid any undue complications in any of the items that we recommend. I understand the intent and the spirit behind that, but I'm worried about having people serving who are at different pay scales doing the same job and trying to deal with some of those ramifications. I would rather just keep it the way it is, keep it as simple as we can, and not, again, confuse the voters over what the intent is and the change. Again, that's just where I'm coming from. I'm sorry, Dr. Grimmel.
Clearly, it's simpler to keep it the way it is, but I would, again, my feeling, I'm in favor of that additional change. So I would actually put it forth as a formal amendment to the original motion and group can vote it up or down. If I can get a second for my amendment.
Well, I believe the maker of the motion would have to accept the amendment.
I don't.
Okay, then we'll, without any further discussion, we'll go to a vote on the,
Parliamentary, no.
He can, okay, I thought the original mover, or the original person who made it had to accept the motion. Okay, but that's an option. Okay. I think in this case, the chair would side with the original interpretation, certainly with the understanding that the group can come back and further introduce a completely new amendment or new resolution, killing the first one with a new one. Okay. So with that, if the town clerk could call the roll on the motion, please.
Okay,
The motion is to keep the language the same and send it to referendum.
okay. Member Riami
Yes.
and I believe Vice Chair Rosen, you made the second?
Yes.
Okay. Member Ty,
Yes.
Member Greenwald,
No.
and Chairperson Donaldson.
Yes,
Motion carries 5-1.
4-1.
4-1.
4-1.
Excuse me, 4-1. I apologize.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Section 305, salaries of commissioners and mayor, we just dealt with, so let's move on. Sorry. The last consideration for today, let's see, let me back up, I'm out of order here. Well, I have two items labeled multiple sections, fire department. Oh, I see where we are here, okay. And then we do have some language suggesting the modification to that section. Okay, so the proposal is to strike a number of items related to this. This actually kind of rolls over into multiple departments and multiple oversights. So while this section talks about fire department, it really applies to other areas as well. With the current language, striking a number of items and substituting principally the employment of the current police chief and the current town clerk may only be terminated by the town commission either on its own initiative or to approve the recommendation of the town manager. I'm going to read this thing in its entirety with what is struck out, just for clarity, and then we can get into what is struck out if there's any part of that we want to put back in for the benefit of those in the audience or online. The reading says the town manager shall have general supervision over all town affairs, shall see that all the ordinances are faithfully executed, and shall have the power to hire, evaluate, discipline, suspend, or discharge any administrative officer or employee of the town in accordance with the town's personnel rules and regulations. The employment of the current police chief and the current town clerk may only be terminated by the town commission, either on its own initiative or to approve the recommendation of the town manager.
Okay. So,
I'm sorry, was that bad to the bone? Oh, thank you.
end of the vote.
I have to get that one. Go ahead.
So this, forgetting that, it all boils down to, does the town manager have authority over all employees of the town or not. And if the town manager does, with the exception of, would be willing to do that with the exception of the current police chief and town clerk. And if those individuals were ever to leave, their replacements would then report to the town manager.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm in favor of everyone immediately, including the police chief and the town clerk, report to the town manager. I realize the one argument is that those individuals have not, or, when they were hired, they reported to the commission and they believe that they're working for the commission and so forth. And they're still, the fact is they're working for the town, they're working for the town manager, they're working for the commission already. It's simply, whether the line responsibility should go to the town manager and have, rather than having, a dotted line to the town manager when the actual authority goes to the town commission. And an argument is that, well, they were, they should be grandfathered because they were under this impression. In business, everywhere I went, including my own career and people that worked for me, it's, okay, you were hired today, you're working for so-and-so, and guess what? Tomorrow, you now work for this other person. And that's the way it is. This is in effect a business, and if we want the town manager to be able to carry out all responsibilities, then all people should be reporting to that person. And once again, if the town commission doesn't like what the town manager is doing, then they should replace the town manager. That's where they have the authority over that person. And I think it just inhibits the town manager to do their job when you're restricting them like this. And once again, I don't know of another town that has that. It's just like unlimited budgets. Everywhere, everyone reports to the town manager, and if the commissions don't like that person, they replace them. So I'm in favor of doing that.
I may have had some other understanding. I thought we were making this provision because we had the sense that that's what the commissioners preferred. I actually agree with you fully, Ron, but if the commissioners, for various reasons, want those two present personnel to continue to report to the commission, I don't have a reason to object to it. As a matter of drafting, Glenn, would it be the commissioner and the clerk in office on the effective date of this statute rather than current? I mean, it just makes it, I think, cleaner.
Yeah.
Dr. Remo.
Yeah, I'm fully with Ron on this one in terms of reporting responsibilities. I think everybody, police chief, town clerk, fire chief, everybody should be reporting to the town manager. I understand completely what Ron is saying regarding grandfathering in, but I'm more ambivalent about the grandfathering part. But I think that the clear-cut shift of reporting responsibilities of police chief, fire chief, everybody else moving forward should clearly be with the town manager and not the commission, irrespective of what I mean, the commission gets to say what goes to referendum, but from a governance standpoint, I think those responsibilities should lie with the town manager.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would suggest that we move that section to section 3.03, departments of the town, which read, the town manager shall have charge of and shall direct the administration of the town departments. Such department shall include, but not necessarily limited to the following combination or variation of clerk, finance, building, police, library, fire, and public works. So I would like to add one sentence to that one. All hiring and termination shall be under the town manager. With or without, I don't know the current practice, Mr. Town Manager. If you want to fire, terminate the finance department, will you have to go through the commission for approval? No?
For finance, no.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I'll keep them in the loop. I mean, it's just good practice, but no, I don't.
So in this case, we may have to put exception there for police chief and fire chief if we want to. But add that to section 3.03 under the town manager.
Well, I mean, the people that are the only people that are excluded now are the police chief and the town clerk. The fire chief is going to be a new position. So I think that we're pretty much agreed on this one with, again, the possible exception of the grandfathering.
I mean, I don't know why I guess, it's a matter of control. And maybe the commissioners or some of them don't want to give up control when they have the control of, right now they have the control of the police chief, the town clerk, and the town manager, and they don't want to give up that control for the current. I mean, I don't know, other than, I don't know what their reasoning is. I'm not personally in favor of it. I think everybody, if a referendum would be passed, that everyone, including the current staff, all of them report to the town manager immediately.
Can we get a motion for that?
Well, I just want to weigh in for a moment. I don't have any trouble with the reporting requirements. That clearly is essential. I'm still struggling a little bit on the dismissal side because I'm a little worried down the road we end up with a town manager who decides he wants to start with a clean slate and just gets rid of everyone, even though the commission may not really think that's where they would want to be. And I'm trying to figure out, maybe I'm overthinking that, but it's a little bit of a concern to me.
I think you're overthinking.
Think I'm overthinking.
I mean, it's,
Perhaps I am.
I mean, it's in business,
Okay.
I work for you and I hire Glenn and now I fire Glenn and you don't like it. Okay. You can say, Ron, I'm retaining Glenn and you are gone. And, I mean, that's the way life works.
That's true. Okay. Right. Did I hear a motion?
I make a motion, or does somebody make it, or I'll make it, that we incorporate this language that the employment of the current police, that we modify that so that it just reads, the town manager should have general supervision over all town affairs, shall see that all the ordinances are faithfully executed, and shall have the power to hire, evaluate, discipline, suspend, or discharge any administrative officer or employee of the town in accordance with the town's personnel rules and regulations, period.
Okay, is there a second on the motion?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? None? If the town clerk would call the roll?
Member Riami,
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Rosen,
Yes.
Member Ty,
Yes.
Member Greenwald,
Yes.
and Chairperson Donaldson.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, let's see. I believe that concludes our unfinished business. Regarding the announcement on the next meeting, and I think that's perhaps also pending a little bit of whether we feel we need an additional meeting. As I understand, we've made really good progress today. Thank all of you for that. We do have at least one pending item that we are going to need to take back under consideration. So we know we're going to have at least one more meeting, and I believe that meeting was already scheduled, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I don't think it was scheduled.
was
Let me just
not?
look at my list.
What was the item that we hadn't?
And there's a meeting scheduled for a week from today.
That's
Yeah.
what I thought.
We have, it went up to July. July
Yeah,
19th, that's our
July
last, today,
19th.
yeah,
So-
July 19th is our last one.
Right, so we're definitely locked in for July 19.
Yes.
And I'm getting the sense that we may need one additional meeting to formally adopt the report and prioritize the recommendations. I don't know if we can craft a complete report and just sitting here in one meeting. I think that'll probably take some collaboration between possibly myself and town manager and the town attorney in order to bring that report back and to take into consideration any minority opinions that the group may wish to offer to be included in that report. So I'm suggesting we need to set that. I don't know that we need to set the meeting today, but I'm getting the sense that we're going to need an additional meeting. So we can defer that to July 19th and take a look at our calendars and determine when that might happen. But it's going to happen pretty quickly, given the timetable. So, okay.
What was the item that,
I'm sorry.
I thought we had voted on every one of them.
I think it was the language on 2.019 was the big one, which was the fire rescue protection on self-control or control over
Oh, I see.
potentially, lack of better words, outsource.
The
I'm not saying that.
outsource one,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
need,
Glenn's got to come up with some
we need
language
some
on that.
language for that one.
And then
A little bit more.
potentially, there was one more. I think we're going to revisit make sure my notes are clear. No, that was approved for one. Okay. I will probably talk to Glenn on the last one you just made a motion on to see if there are secondary effects to other sections. That's all. Yeah. We're there, about 90% there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, certainly any items you discover along the way, you can certainly bring back next time. Vice Chair Rosen.
Before we adjourn, can we agree that next week too, we were asked to sort of prioritize those that were most important? So let's put that on the agenda for next week and make some progress through that so that we can get closer to conclusion.
Yeah, I think we should each take a look at the list and kind of draw up our thoughts about each of those, certainly. Yeah. Okay. That being said, then, we will acknowledge we are having a meeting. The next meeting of the group will be July 19th at 2:00 in the Town Commission chambers. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
No